Joining us at the Cooperative Party Women's Network event annual conference this year. It's a bit different and I really hope that everybody's going to enjoy the session as much as usual. I'm finding it slightly strange talking at my face, so do ignore me if I say something a bit strange. I'm just getting used to the whole prospect. But without much further ado, we've got an hour to discuss something that is huge and monumental and very important, so I'm not going to witter on about anything else. For those of you that have been active in the Women's Network for a while, you know that we're passionate about engaging more women in political structures and in the economy, and addressing the huge disparities in gender equality across the UK economy. And so it made sense, given the Cooperative Party's report that was launched this year, Owning the Future, which hopefully you've all read. I have, it's very good. We are going to spend the next hour with our panel talking about how we cooperate for gender equality. How can cooperatives drive female economic empowerment? Before I introduce our fabulous speakers this evening, who everyone has definitely come to listen to and not me, I'm just going to frame a little bit of the discussion so that we can just make sure that we're nice and focused on what we want to talk about. So when I was thinking about this event and we were putting it together, I thought that really what we had to focus on was the fact that cooperatives have contributed to and innately promote gender equality. And I think that sometimes we're a little bit reluctant to be that bold, and we should be that bold. As a model, cooperatives do innately promote gender equality, and that's evidenced from our history, from the fact that full participation of women was a cornerstone of the Rochdale Pioneers that were founded in 1844, to the Cooperative Women's Guild established in 1883, who successfully lobbied on issues that are key to empowering women, such as equal pay, divorce law, maternity benefits, and the Gender Equality Committee of the ICA, which has pushed for progress globally with the development of the ICA strategy for promoting gender equality since 1995. So historically, I think we're, as a party and as a movement, very good at promoting gender equality. But how do we actually make sure that translates into our economy now? Really interestingly, a survey carried out by the ICA in 2015, that's the International Cooperatives Alliance, found that 75% of respondents believed that cooperatives had, one, improved participation of women over the last 20 years in the workforce, and two, which I think is really important for this discussion, is that cooperatives had indirectly facilitated access to employment. And that was because as housing, healthcare and childcare co-ops have made services more affordable and accessible, it enabled more women to go to work. Because a lot of those costs and those outgoings often mean that women make a decision not to go to work, or maybe not make particular career choices because economically it's less viable. And crucially, as we would not be online if it weren't for COVID, and therefore I would be remiss to not mention it. The European Commission has estimated that achieving gender equality would facilitate an increase in GDP per capita by up to 9.6% between now and 2050. And the reason that I think that's particularly important now is that if we consider what's happened over the last year, it's been estimated that GDP has fallen by 20% in the second quarter of this year. So if we could actually get some more cooperatives, we might actually be able to do something about that drop in GDP. So increasing the size of the cooperative economy would be beneficial for female participation and diversity, but also achieving gender equality would benefit the economy. So it seems that we're going towards the same aim. So this evening, even, because it's now dark, we're going to have a discussion with two fantastic speakers about how we achieve those objectives, that objective of doubling the size or expanding the size of the cooperative economy. And how the session is going to run is that I'm going to invite Seema and then Rebecca to speak about their experiences and their views on this subject. And then you, the audience, are going to have an opportunity to ask your questions, and we're going to facilitate some discussion in that way. Please do tweet, and please do make sure that it's as interactive as possible. We're going to do our best online that we can. So without further ado, could I ask Seema Malhotra, who is the Labour and Cooperative MP for Feltham and Heston, and is also serving as the Shadow Minister for Employment, if she would like to open with her introductory comments. Thank you, Seema.
Great, thank you very much, Ria, and it's a pleasure to join and to support the work that you're doing, which is incredible. I'm just so pleased that the Women's Network has kept going as well and continue to go from strength to strength. This is, in my view, the topic of the day because we have seen, sadly, the worst recession of, I think, any major economy following the COVID crisis. And what we've also seen in recent economic data is that we've seen a drop of over 700,000 payroll employees since March. We've seen the number of people on 0 hours contracts rise, and there are clear signs emerging that our economy is actually becoming less resilient, not more. The worry is, as we look at this, is those who have been unequally hit will continue to be unequally kind of left behind as the economy does start to recover after COVID. So that challenge comes alongside the opportunity. The opportunity being that the community response to COVID has been unprecedented. I don't think I've seen anything like it, with friends, neighbours, people who did not know each other extending this tremendous hand of friendship through a very, very difficult period, and wanting to find ways in which they were going to be able to better the lives of strangers who live next door to them. I think that has brought with it a new imperative around the roles of communities to work together to support economic recovery. But it also brings an opportunity for the revival of cooperative principles, because all the research shows what you've outlined, Ria, and some of what I'd like to share. All the research seems to show that alongside the values of cooperative enterprise, the economic benefits are very clear, because in evaluation after evaluation, we see the difference compared to the sort of more traditional capitalist economy. So as we look to rebuild, that's our own neighbourhoods, our cities, our country, it's right that we look to economic measures that are going to put people first. It's interesting as well when we look at how the key workers that have kept us going through the downturn have been those that are lower paid carers, nurses, those who are stacking shelves in our supermarkets. Often key workers who were branded unskilled were the ones that were able to efficiently know what was needed and keep our communities and our economy growing on the ground. I mentioned about how the crisis didn't affect everybody equally, and certainly we've seen the structural inequality that is embedded in our society really coming to the fore. BAME people were hit harder by the COVID health crisis, but they've also been hit harder by the economic crisis. The same for women who have been in often more precarious roles that have seen their incomes also drop. Not just jobs have been lost, but then incomes, household incomes dropping, and the incomes of women. And the Women's Budget Group talked about how low-paid women were at the highest risk of exposure as well during the crisis. So this has been far from an equal impact of COVID-19, and therefore it raises the question about how we're going to build this more equal recovery. So just a couple of other points before I close my remarks. I think that the inequality has also been there, and structurally so. In 2019, we saw the women's pay gap being around over 17%, with women paid approximately 83 pence for every £1 that men were paid. And with COVID-19, we saw a report by the Young Women's Trust highlighting how women had suffered that triple hit. I talked about jobs and income loss, but also facing increased childcare responsibilities and more likely to suffer from mental health problems. The advantage and the opportunity from co-ops, I think, if I just talk about, you talked about some of the ways in which co-ops have actually supported equality. But if you look at where power lies in co-ops as well, 37% of directorships are held by women in co-ops compared to 20% in leading companies. And it's even more stark for management positions, around 25% of those in executive posts in co-ops held by women compared to 5% for leading companies. And the International Labour Organization that looked at co-ops a few years ago said that although conditions vary according to context, those within the cooperative movement, they've seen a growing attention to gender issues. So it isn't just about women being in those positions of power and influence and leadership and the opportunities, but also where co-ops that are more inclusive, that have the voice of communities and people much closer to the agendas that they pursue, see that growing attention to gender issues and the impact that the outcomes can have on people's lives, and be closer to the challenges that are faced by people in their lives, and therefore the solutions, both the social and economic solutions to our communities, coming through much more strongly in how co-ops think and how co-ops work. So my point is for us to think about is that right now we've got choices that we can make. We can choose to build back better and build back more equally. We can start to think about how we want to rebuild with cooperative structures and think about how we maximize the voice of communities to engage people in how we look at financial resilience. There hasn't been a worse time that I can remember of financial income inequalities and what that's going to mean for people in our communities. Christmas is on the horizon. Already families writing to me that they're not going to be able to afford Christmas presents. Financial inclusion in terms of how, households. Could people be at risk of losing their homes now the government's lifted the ban on evictions? And many solutions to how people might save, how people might prioritize spend, how people might set up local enterprises, with local enterprise needing to be as much part of how people regain employment post-COVID if jobs aren't going to be as forthcoming and vacancy rates certainly aren't what we would want them to be. And how are we going to think about cooperative principles and reach out to make sure that people have the understanding, the skills and the knowledge to build cooperatives in their communities and work with their neighbours on solutions, not just on managing the crisis? Because research shows that cooperatives are more resilient in times of crisis. They are less likely to fail than other forms of business. They do boost productivity and they can help reduce inequalities of power and wealth in communities. So to close by saying that, if anything, that the COVID crisis has unearthed and unmasked the deep structural inequalities in society. Gender inequality has been a big part of that, and it is a growing part of the story of how COVID is impacting families and communities. It is going to be a question about where power is going to lie and whether it is going to be increasingly entrenched in the hands of men who have wealth already and who are doing better in areas, parts of the economy that have been less impacted by the COVID shutdowns. But as we think about building back better, we should be thinking about good work. We should be thinking about the good workplace, the family-friendly workplace, and we should be thinking about the good society. And that's where I do believe that cooperative principles led by people in the co-op movement could make a huge change for not just the immediate future, but for this post-COVID economic settlement and what that means for generations to come. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Seema, and that was a really, really nice way of shaping the debate as well, and hopefully we will have some more discussion on that kind of post-COVID economic recovery and some of that discussion later, so thank you very much. Before I introduce Rebecca, just a quick reminder to all of us, including myself, just to lean in a little bit when we're talking into the microphone, because sometimes the quality of the sound isn't quite as good. I've been informed by myself. So without much further ado, can I then hand over to Rebecca Harvey, who is the Executive Editor of Cooperative News.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Ria, and thanks, Seema. What a great start to this conversation. And it's wonderful to be able to share the platform with both of you. So thank you very much for the invite. I think I'd like to start by saying just how many brilliant women there are in the cooperative movement, including the Cooperative Party. I had a quick count up earlier before we started, and I think of the 26 Labour and Cooperative MPs, 11 are women, about just over 40%. And of those women, 6 are in Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet, which is great, including Seema and, of course, Annalisa Dodds, the shadow chancellor. But it doesn't stop there, does it? I mean, just this morning, conveniently, Cooperatives UK, which is the business support network for UK co-ops, announced Rose Marley as its new chief executive. So huge congratulations to her. And actually, Rose's appointment means that 4 of the UK's anchor support organisations for cooperatives are led by women. So we've got Rose at Co-ops UK, you've got Cilla Ross at the Co-op College, you've got Liz McIver at the Heritage Trust, and you've got myself at Co-op News. And of the independent retail societies, the 2 largest, Mid-Counties and Central England, have female presidents in Helen Wiseman and Elaine Dean. Central England also has a female chief executive in Debbie Robinson. And there's Ursula at Lincolnshire, Ursula Lidbetter, and Fiona McInnes at Clydebank. So there are a lot of women about, they're brilliant. And it's not just in the UK either. I mean, outside the UK, in the international co-op movement, you've got Melina Morrison at Business Councils of Cooperatives and Mutuals in Australia. You've got Ros Henry, newly appointed or fairly recently appointed at Co-op Business New Zealand. There's Agnes Mathers at Co-ops Europe, and of course, Semel Essim at the Co-ops unit of the International Labour Organisation. These women are wonderful, and they should be celebrated too. Interestingly, just as an aside, the ILO is celebrating its centenary this year. And as part of this, throughout 2020, Semel has been sharing online photo exhibitions featuring the contributions of co-ops and the wider social and solidarity economy, particularly focusing on how they support the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And just this morning, she shared online a slideshow of how co-ops and the social and solidarity economy are supporting SDG number 5. And SDG number 5 is very specifically about aiming towards achieving gender equality. And she shares about 6 or 7 different co-ops, and just to mention a few here. So she highlights Semri in Turkey, where members from among host community and refugee women earn a living together by producing jewellery and household textiles, clothing and other accessories as well. She shared a story about a dairy co-op in rural India, where women do the majority of the work around milk cattle, collecting fodder, cleaning stables, taking care of animals, milking them, marketing them, the whole thing. And there's the Cooperative de Ahorro in Ecuador. And this supports young women and men as well, male entrepreneurs and small business owners in producing sweets like tamarind and guava candy. But what the most important thing that these co-ops do, as well as providing financial independence for women, are providing education and training. In the cooperative, these women are decision makers. They are seen and they are acknowledged. And like the title of this session, it asks how co-ops can drive female economic empowerment. And some of the women I've mentioned earlier are the product of the inclusivity, equality and equity found in co-ops. And co-ops should categorically give women the same opportunities as their male counterparts. Of course they should. And obviously this isn't always the case. And that again applies both to the UK and outside the UK too. And I think that when asking the how of how co-ops can drive female economic empowerment and equality, it's important to work to ask whether they actually do, or at least how well they do it across all jobs at all levels. I mean, I mentioned some pretty great women already, but even at the Co-op Party, Karen Christensen was the first female general secretary, and she was appointed in 2012. And obviously then there was Claire McCarthy and then Jo. And of course, Chris Herries, the wonderful woman, the former chair who passed away so sadly recently, she was also the first female chair of Cooperatives UK. Oh, cats, sorry. That's the first time it's happened, sorry about that. So, Chris was appointed chair of Cooperatives UK in 2013. So that was 143 years of male leadership at the apex body in the UK before there's a woman involved. And the first general secretary of Co-ops UK was Dame Pauline Green. She was appointed in 2000. And she obviously went on to be the first female president of the International Cooperative Alliance, and that was 2009. The Co-op Group, Jo Whitfield is the chief executive of the food division, and she's brilliant, but all of the chief executives have been men, white men. As Seema said, a lot of the frontline jobs, a lot of the lower paid jobs in UK retail are still largely held by women. And, you know, these women juggle part-time work, traditional caring responsibilities, managing households. And that's even before you start to factor in COVID and the horrors that has brought so many families. And while I mentioned the 3 female retail society chief executives, that's only 3 of about 18 independent societies. And of course, there's over 7,000 co-ops in the UK. So there are many more female leaders in there, but of the retail societies, only 3 out of 18. And then there are also examples of where the co-op model kind of hinder, or at least not help women. And I think you need to also look at the wider economic context of female empowerment. Sometimes there's a lack of access to education or capital, and I think that needs to be discussed too. And what I would say to the how of driving economic empowerment is 2 things. So firstly, I'd say when individual co-ops are looking at how to drive women's empowerment, a good starting response is to frame your answers through the cooperative principles. And I'm so glad Seema's already brought them up. So, you know, as a co-op, you should be thinking about, are your women members democratically involved in the decisions you make? Are your women encouraged to participate economically if possible? What education, training, information are they receiving, and how? How are you cooperating with other co-ops to share best practice about engaging and involving women? How are you serving the women in your communities? And then secondly, I would argue that, you know, women's empowerment, whether that's economic, political, or anything else, is really helped when women support other women. You know, that's what the Co-operative Women's Network is all about. Men can help too, and not discounting them, and a vital part of that conversation, but solidarity and support from other women is so important. Now, I know gender is obviously only one type of equality, but it's still hugely important, and it has been historically for the co-op movement, as always been mentioned. I mean, I'm the 15th editor of Co-op News. We've been around for 150 years, and I'm only the 2nd woman editor. The first was Lily Howe in the 70s. Before that, there was Mary Stott, who worked with Co-op News as a sub-editor and writer of the Cooperative Women's page in the 30s and 40s, and also had a stint in the 50s. And before that, there was Alice Ackland, who was born in 1849. So she'd be 171 this year. And she was invited to edit a women's section of Co-op News, and she used the pages to appeal to women members. So I've gone over slightly. So I'm going to just finish up by reading out something that she said that I think is really important and does have a bearing on what we're talking today. So she wrote, "What are men always urged to do when there is a meeting held at any place to encourage or start cooperative institutions? Come, help, vote, criticise, act. What are women urged to do? Come and buy. That is the limit of our special work pointed out to us as women. We can be independent members of our store, but we are only asked to come and buy. Cannot we go further ourselves? Why should not we have our meetings, our readings, our discussions?" So today we do, and I'm thrilled to be part of this meeting and this discussion. So I'm looking forward to an ongoing conversation.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I really liked that quote at the end. I thought that really framed the ongoing discussion, and that was brilliant. And also just the list of names and examples that you had at the beginning. I think that really kind of brought to life how far we have progressed in terms of more women taking the lead in the cooperative movement, and that's a really big thing for us. But actually, there's still a long way to go. So that was really helpful. Thank you. I've got a few questions that have come through, but I thought I'd just open up with a broader question and take Chair's prerogative, if that's okay. We'll start with that, and then if Seema and Rebecca are okay with that, we'll just go on with taking 2 or 3 questions, and then you can pick the ones that you would like to answer. So I guess just to start with, and you've both touched on it already to some extent, but if we are thinking specifically about some of, this isn't an exhaustive list, but some of the inequalities around gender that persist in the workplace and a woman and gender equality being achieved, we've got the gender pay gap, which Seema referenced, and we've got underrepresentation on company boards. We've got the dual burden around work and home, making decisions about children and career prospects. We've got, on top of that, the extortionate cost of childcare and the low uptake of schemes that might be able to even out some of those dual burdens and responsibilities, such as shared parental leave. So I think at the last survey, the uptake is around 2 to 5% of people are taking up shared parental leave. And so I guess if we think of those as some of the issues that women and men, because it does affect men too, are facing in our communities, my question is, how can co-ops specifically address these persistent inequalities? Why are cooperative models so well placed to tackle them? And Seema touched on this in her opening remarks. And what stands in the way of expanding the size of the cooperative economy? If we look at other countries like Germany that have much larger cooperative sectors to their economy, what is it that's standing in the way in the UK, and can it be solved in part by involving more women and achieving greater gender equality? So could I invite Seema first, if you would like to? Seema, I'm sorry, you're still on mute.
Interesting, because half of it's done by the administrator and then you forget. I mean, I think that you've really raised a very important question, and it leans into what I was referring to about the good workplace, because the good workplace is in a context quite often of what actually goes on in the environment around it and how much it's thinking about, you know, the whole person. And I think that there's an opportunity for, when you're talking about shared parental leave, etc., and the low numbers. Often the lack of take-up of policy is because you're worried about sometimes the consequences of doing it, and you don't have a supportive environment, and that change hasn't really been culturally implemented. You know, change is cultural as well as legislative, and I think there's certainly a place when we look at what I was referring to with the Young Women's Trust as well, that women have been hit with jobs and income, but also the disproportionate burden at home. And if we are to get solutions that are to be cost effective, where they're in environments of trust with flexibility, this is where I think there's an opportunity for co-ops to be thinking, what could we think differently when it comes to sort of cooperative childcare and early years development, and how can we do that so that communities are much more at the heart. And often when you've got neighbours who start to get to know each other and communities start to get to know each other, they often will feel safer. So that the progress that we've made with communities engaged in hubs around some of the crisis management in the crisis, let's start to think afresh about how people can come together to think differently about the challenges for families that are shared, and what we can do and come together to help resolve and move forward on them. And I do believe that women's voices will be key, not least because women are going to be the people who, if we look at just what COVID has done, will end up being the beneficiaries of those opportunities. And I'll just close by what I think is Penina Thompson, who was sort of leading a leading voice in trying to get women onto boards. She said in her book that the customer is queen, and actually women in leadership positions in organizations, understanding women who were using those services were designing them far better because they understood their customer a lot better. And that's where I think that women who are, having these experiences will be the ones able to come up with the ideas. And what we need to do is to be able to educate and train in how you set up and run co-ops as well. That has been a barrier in what do you set up as the structures, what support is there administratively, how do you deal with some of the regulations. And if we can get more people trained in that aspect of co-ops, then the ideas they have can be put and made a reality.
Thanks, Seema. I think I agree with pretty much everything that you've said there. I think what I would add to that is that I read an article, I think it was last year sometime, and it had the title of something like, what's a woman's greatest enemy? It's a lack of time to herself. And it went on to talk about if what it takes to create are long stretches of time alone, that's something women have never had the luxury to expect. And I think a lot of it's to do with women's expectations as well. I think what women expect now is more than what women have expected in the past. And I think you're exactly right, Seema, when you're talking about getting women involved in actually creating the structures in which they operate. Cooperatives are owned by the members, whether that's consumers or workers or anyone else. And if those members are women, then they can make the changes, they can make the rules. Obviously, it's slightly different in worker cooperatives to consumer cooperatives, but if you involve women and also young women from the start, then they can make those changes that feed through. You can see those changes going through the years, through the decades. No, I think you summed it up really well. I think that's so yeah, involving young people and involving women in the structures, I think is going to be the answer to that. But I think those are big questions, Ria. I think they're very, very interesting.
Thank you very much. Yes, I did realise as I was sort of going through it, but I just thought I'd just throw it out there and we'll see how we get on. I've got 2 phenomenally talented women on the panel, so I just thought I'd exploit it, sorry. Now, we do have some really good questions that have come through from WhatsApp, so I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm just trying to get as many of them as possible without repeating myself. So I'm just going to read out the questions in groups of 3. Is that okay with you both? Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay, cool. And those that have given a name I'll provide, but some of them are anonymous, and then I'll invite you both to address them. So the first question is from Geeta Patel, who says, most women have a portfolio career interspersed with caring responsibilities. What empowerment is needed to enjoy parity with males around career progression and pay? That's the first one. And then I feel you may have touched on this a bit, Rebecca, but I think it's an interesting question. This is from Tia. How can senior women in co-ops further empower other women? And one more from an anonymous person. Has COVID-19 made it easier or harder for women in work? It feels like there has been an expectation that I do the cooking, cleaning, childcare at home, as well as trying to work. I've lost my professional space. I think Seema touched on that as well. So they're the 3 questions. Does anyone have a preference on who would like to go first? Yeah, Seema?
You tell us, Ria.
Do you want to go for it?
I'll quickly go. Look, I'll just make a couple of points. I mean, I've had a portfolio career, and it is very difficult. I think what ends up being can end up being important is having a very good mentor, because when you leave the structured workplace, you still need somebody that can be someone that's kind of watching your progress and can help you when you sort of start to take the path of least resistance sometime, and when you can't always tell that where whether you're spending your time and priorities in exactly the best way, and when you start to feel you're slipping down on one side, who can be your sounding board? So I think mentors are really important, and a range of mentors. And sometimes that means seeking somebody out, and people can be very flattered to be asked as well, but who you think would be helpful to you. And the other is then otherwise using your networks to get that support structure in place as you embark on your portfolio career. I think the second is about how senior women in co-ops can empower others. I mean, I think Rebecca I was just like, wow, when Rebecca was reading out that list, I was like, I had no idea, because women are often invisible, aren't they? You may have women who are really senior, but they might just be behind the one man who's a little bit more senior, and you just don't get seen. And I think visibility is so important. I think if there are ways that we can support each other in events like this, other events, writing, as Rebecca's in Co-op News, ways to raise profile and ways to help increase impact. And I think that helps both ways. So definitely one for Rebecca to help. How do we really work both ways with all those women in those brilliant positions? And I think thirdly, COVID-19 has, I think, undoubtedly made it harder for women. And also the juggling work alongside caring responsibilities. The challenge was there before. I think it's markedly more difficult. And I think this is why how we find ways to connect women with each other and with solutions that can help, especially as we start to emerge, as we will, from COVID. What structures do we think about putting in place for 6 months' time or a year's time if we want the future to be different?
I think visibility and mentoring, absolutely. I think mentoring, someone suggested me to find a mentor, and actually it's been brilliant, and she's great, and she's the kind of person I can ring up and go, what am I doing, oh my gosh, and she's great. So thank you very much, Jo, you might be watching. She's brilliant. But apart from that, visibility, absolutely. Women don't often put themselves forward. I read somewhere that women will apply for a job that they think they can do, and men will apply for a job that they know they can do, and that's not right. That's not right at all. It's interesting what Tia was saying about how senior women in co-ops can empower other women, because it goes back to what I was saying about just women promoting each other and having that peer support network. So a little bit I'd like to say is around the Cooperative Women's Challenge. I don't know if people have come across that before, but that was originally launched in about 2011, and it was launched by the Co-op Group and the Retail Society to encourage work towards equity in representation in democratic structures, and to increase the number of women in senior management roles, and also to campaign for gender equality across economic and social participation. So we relaunched that in 2016. So it was a partnership between the Co-op Group, Co-op News, Co-op UK and the Cooperative College. And we held a series of events, and we've got a Facebook group, Women in Cooperatives, which I know lots and lots of people on here are already members of, because they were watching it and said they would join this group. And this work is continuing. So alongside the Facebook group, we have launched a series of monthly webinars as well called Cooperative Women's Voices. So that launched last month with a conversation with Sarah Vicari, and she's another brilliant cooperative woman. So she and her husband got funding from Co-ops for Dev, part of the funding stream through the ICA, and they run this thing called aroundtheworld.coop, and they went around the world and visited lots of cooperatives and made films about them, and some of the women she spoke with are absolutely incredible. So do go to aroundtheworld.coop and have a look at the films there, because they're beautiful. They're about 20 minutes long and they are great. I think COVID-19 has made it so much harder for women at work. I know it has for me. We're a fairly small team. We've been working from home since the middle of March, and we have definitely lost our professional space. I mean, I've got some lovely postcards behind me, but this is a very, very small room. I've got a 3-year-old child. 2 days of childcare costs the same as my mortgage. It's a very, very, very tricky situation. So I think that there does need to be changes. I don't know what the answers are, but I think involving women and involving working women in those conversations are going to be very, very important in creating any kind of meaningful, sustainable, long-lasting solution to those questions. And as Seema said, this goes beyond COVID. This was a problem before COVID. It's going to be a much longer problem as lockdown continues. Who knows what's going to happen next year? But it's not going to go away anytime soon. And there needs to be preparation, there needs to be work done to create some kind of environment that does work for women in work. And I think I would add to that men are part of that solution. I think men do need to take up more of those responsibilities, more of the washing up, more of the cooking, more of the mental load that is just basically managing a house full of people and pets and children.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got some more fantastic questions. Something that actually for the audience that you might be aware of, that the Women's Network did have a little look at some of the legislation around shared parental leave, as kind of looking at, as Rebecca was talking about, how some of the issues around dual burdens and the kind of the extra work that women often have to do in order to balance work and home requires men to really take a more active role as well. And some of the work that the Women's Network has done over the past year and a half has been looking in more detail at what the barriers are. And one of the big barriers seems to be around the fact that we have some legislation that in Nordic countries has made huge changes to women being more able to take a more balanced role in work and home through shared parental leave and pay, but that in this country there's issues in terms of access from the employer, of whether it's financially viable, lots and lots of issues. So that's just something I want to throw in there because I think it's a really interesting solution that doesn't seem to have solved everything. Now back to the questions. We have another question from Marcella, who says, this recession will hit women hardest, as does every economic shock. I saw this example, she thinks, in Birmingham, where they had a co-working space, which was also a childminding/nursery co-op. What co-op solutions like that can help women back to work? The next question is from Sandra, who says, what can be done to encourage financial institutions to support cooperatives set up by women? As currently the criteria to meet is set based on financial models and a view of what makes a successful business is based on historic data set by predominantly male-run organisations. And thirdly, a question from Elaine Dean, who's president of Central England Cooperative Society, who says, I would be interested in hearing what the panelists each feel are the 3 top things they can do to ensure their successors are women. So, Seema, do you want to start us off?
I love that last question. We don't often think about our successors just less than a year after an election, but I think it is really an important question because we have sort of approached the 50% or around 50% of women MPs, which is what is in the Labour Party rulebook for Labour MPs. I mean, it clearly isn't that across the whole House of Commons, but I do think that making sure women understand what it takes to successfully organise is really important. I mean, I won't plug the Favour Women's Network mentoring scheme, but it's in its 10th year now, I think, and it has been very successful in giving women those softer political skills and understanding of what it takes to organise. The Labour Women's Network has also been incredible at that. And I would encourage everyone to join the Labour Women's Network and the Favour Women's Network and the Co-op Women's Network, and definitely push, keep pushing women's talent in everywhere, really. I think just this point about the co-working space. Well, look, in all honesty, look at the House of Commons. That's kind of, a similar principle. It's got a creche there for, mums or dads that need to take advantage of, services, and that can make all the difference to being able to do your job or not. I do wonder about whether one of the revolutionary parts of the post-COVID economic structures is going to be needing to have more community home working structures, because I don't think people are going to want to go back to the office every day. I think they will want to be in the office, but increasingly you see organisations, even like my local council, Hounslow, that designed and built its new building on the basis that it would expect people to work at home 1 to 2 days a week. I think that is now going to become a cultural shift, in which case we have to think about what kind of community facilities we're going to have in order that people can not have to work at home, but may work in their neighbourhood and support the local economy, and therefore to look at family and childcare solutions around a shift to how we think about the workplace, not just being the office that you travel to.
At Co-op News, we're still thinking about what we're doing in terms of returning to the office, and I would love to see a creche in Holyoke House, it's in Manchester. We share it with Cooperatives UK, with ABCOR, the credit union, Apex Body, with the college, with Heritage Trust, and with others. I think that would be difficult. I think I do agree with Seema that more and more people are going to be wanting to work not in their home but in their neighbourhood. So one of my colleagues, for example, he's moved to Sheffield from Manchester. He can still work because he can work remotely, he can work from home, and that's absolutely fine. So I do like the idea of kind of community-based childcare rather than kind of co-working space childcare. But I really like that question, Marcella. Thank you. In terms of the encouraging women to set up financial models, I would suggest looking at credit unions. I mean, ABCL is a good place to start, but, you know, credit unions are basically financial cooperatives. They're owned by the members. And I know people's opinions of credit unions depend on where they're from, the interaction they've had with them, but they're fantastic. I mean, I'm a member of the Co-op Credit Union, and the Co-op Credit Union is open in membership to anyone who is part of or employed by a cooperative. I think that they've got a list on their website. So anyone in Co-op News, Co-ops UK, any of the major retail societies, etc., I'm sure the Co-op Part is in there as well, can be a member of the credit union. So I think there are options out there, but I do agree, but it kind of goes back to the answer I gave earlier. Women need to be involved in the creation of the structures to actually provide an answer that is suitable for women. And Elaine Dean, ensuring our successors are women. I think that I'm going to disagree with you here. I think that women are brilliant, and I would love to have a woman as my successor. But what I would also say is, you know, I'm a steward of Co-op News. I'm not going to be here forever. You know, Co-op News has been around for a long, long time. I think that I would need to make sure that my successor is right for the job. And if that woman is that person, then absolutely brilliant. I would wholeheartedly encourage them. I think what I would want more is, you know, for a wholehearted commitment to the cooperative values and principles, and to make sure that they will be there for a cooperative press that serves the movement in the way that is as right and proper. Having said that, what I would do is encourage and mentor any prospective women successors in a way that might encourage them to go down that path. And that takes us full circle back to the mentorship idea, because I think as well as you know, individuals like Seema and myself being mentored, I think we have a responsibility to provide a mentorship to the, you know, the people coming after us, to the women coming after us. I think that will be a huge part of ensuring our successors are women, and not necessarily that our successors in this particular role are women, but that our successors in the cooperative movement are women, that women carry on coming through the movement and making a difference for other women in society and communities.
Thank you very much. Okay, so these are 3 quite large questions, not that we haven't had massive questions already, but possibly our last round depending on time. So question 1 is from an anonymous individual. Violence against women and girls is a constant struggle and has got worse during the crisis. Have co-ops got a solution to this problem? This is from Amber. She says, I'm a director at Southern Co-op. Half the board of 10 senior management are women. However, there's a gender pay gap as customer service assistants in a food store are mostly female, part-time, and don't want promotion. We are trying to change this. Any ideas as to what we can do about this? And the third question is from Patrick, who says, the burden to tackle gender inequality can't all be on women. The problem is the men. What advice would you give feminist men like me to help empower women in the workplace and achieve gender equality in wider society or the economy? Seema, would you like to start?
Great, thanks very much. I'll just take the last question first. They're all really good questions. Actually, I wonder if you could just repeat the second question, because I didn't fully get that. This is, I think, the Southern Co-op.
Yes, this was from Amber. So she says half the board, so she's a director at Southern Co-op, half the board of 10 senior management are women. However, there's a gender pay gap as the customer service assistants in the food stores are mostly female, part-time, and don't want promotion. They're trying to change it, and have you got any ideas as to what we can do about it?
Yeah. Great. I think on the last question first. I mean, I think congratulations. I think and thank you to. I shouldn't really say thank you. I think it's a responsibility for all men to be thinking about inequality, and sometimes it helps to think, what if this was your sister or your partner or
your daughter or your niece, and would you want them to be treated in the way that other women are? And often what's changed male behaviour in senior positions, with the research done by Dove being, I think, one of the most quoted examples, is when there were, when women wanted to change the way products were marketed, what they did was they actually did interviews with the daughters of the male executives. And when they heard how the daughters felt about themselves, about their bodies, confidence, it changed the way they market their products to be, all about, much more about body beautiful and you're amazing, and to be really positive. And I think there is a consciousness which is about really listening and understanding. So whichever way organizations might challenge themselves to listen to voices they're not hearing, sometimes that can make a very, very big difference. And I think on just mention about I don't have a very clear answer to the violence against women and girls and domestic violence question. I think it's an important one for thinking about co-op structures. I know in my community that the co-ops that are at the heart of some of the more difficult estates have been places that people have been able to reach out to, and they're trusted and involved in in other community services. And so I think it is a question about whether there's more that could be done through existing the co-op movement more widely. I think just around sort of the gender pay gap, if the question is, I think the question is, are people being paid fairly to start with? I mean, my personal view is nobody should be on anything less than the living wage. I think it is also a question about empowerment and engagement and empowerment, and people to, in a structured way, work with women on the front line. Unions can be very good at that sort of thing, and so I think you do need strategies to empower the workplace for people to understand A, what they're worth, and B, how they should put themselves forward for opportunity and why.
The violence against women is really interesting from a cooperative perspective. I mentioned the Cooperative Women's Challenge piece earlier. Alongside this, Central England Co-op runs an event for women colleagues, members, and various others each year on International Women's Day. And a few years ago, there was a patchwork quilt there on display, and it was created by Roxanne Ellis, who's a Labour and Co-op councillor, after she read this census. It was called the Femicide Census. And in that census records the names of all the women killed by their partners or ex-partners, and specifically between 2009 and 2015. And during that time, 598 women in England and Wales were killed by their partners or ex-partners on display. So I think one of the things that co-ops specifically can do is raise awareness of this. I mean, Central England took it to Congress, the Cooperative Congress. They did it at the Central England Women's event, and it's been elsewhere too. And I know Roxanne is fairly active on social media around it as well. And it's incredibly powerful because what she's created is basically a patchwork quilt. Each little square, it has got the name of the woman who was killed, and it's incredibly powerful, incredibly moving. So if you do get a chance to look it up, please do, and grab a tissue and just really take time to think about that, because it is awful. But I think that raising awareness piece is really important, and I think that goes for the violence against shop workers too. I know that the Co-op group, and again Central England and many others too, have really been campaigning for, it's Alex Norris's bill against the violence against shop workers. I think raising that awareness, using their voice as retailers, making people aware of what is happening against shop workers, which include women and men, is vital. And that's one of the ways that they can use their voice. Patrick, thank you very much for being a feminist man. It's very much appreciated from all of us. I think it's great that men do stand up for women, and I think it's hugely important. I think that, as Seema said, just think if it was your sister, it was your mother, it was your daughter, it was your niece, auntie, putting yourselves in the position of the women who are receiving whatever treatment you don't agree with, I think is a good place to start. But actually vocalizing and treating women like people as well, you know, that's always a good start. I had an email the other day to the Co-op News girls. I didn't like that. So I think treating women as professionals and understanding that they are in their position for a reason, whatever that reason is, and treating them like people is a huge part of that. Amber, half the board are women. That's fantastic. Congratulations to everybody at Southern. I think the pay gap is really tricky because on the one hand, you know, customer service assistants positions, especially part-time ones, do chime with the fact that the you know, there are so many other considerations to be taken by those women in that role, like the childcare aspect, like the home management aspect, etc. And as Seema said, I think the way to change the pay gap would be to, you know, increase the wage of the lowest paid and lowering the wage of the highest paid, and that would bring it nice and even. But I know obviously it's not quite that simple, and there'll be a lot of things to take into consideration. But you know, the living wage is hugely important, and I know that a lot of cooperatives are making the move towards that, and it is going to be very expensive. But at the end of the day, cooperatives are about people, and you need to look after the people, your members, your colleagues, and your communities.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. And unbelievably, we are 4 minutes from the end of the session, and I can't quite believe we're here already, because I had Izzy reminding me that we were nearly finished. So thank you so much for the discussion. I'm just going to kind of sum up some of what we've talked about, because we've just got a couple of minutes left. Because in the course of this hour, we have managed to go from discussing the progress that has been made in the co-op movement and the innate ability of cooperatives to empower women, through to how we try to achieve greater gender equality through mentoring, skills and training, being involved in the creation of the structures in businesses and organisations, to the role of co-ops in a post-COVID economy, and the opportunities, as difficult as this time is, the opportunities that may arise from changing working practices and structures that help promote gender equality and create more balance in future. And I can't do justice to summing up the whole discussion, but I do think that it was fantastic. So I'd like to firstly thank Rebecca and Seema for taking the time out from their very busy schedules, for everything they had to say. I think it facilitated a phenomenal level of discussion that clearly has engaged a lot of people just from reading the WhatsApp thread. I'd also like to thank all our members who have sent through questions and got really involved in this discussion. And I also just wanted to take the opportunity, if I may, as it's my last event as the voluntary convener of the Cooperative Party Women's Network, to say a big thank you, because I've really enjoyed doing this over the last 3 years. And I wish the new steering committee the best of luck, because I have no doubt it will go from strength to strength, and it's time for me to take a step back and let another woman, and many women, take the mantle forward. And could I say thank you to the anonymous comment that wanted to thank me for the work that I've done coordinating Women's Network. That was very kind of you to put on the thread. So thank you. Okay, so without much ado, it's now 1 minute to the end of the session, so we should let Seema go and do her event with Keir, and Rebecca, have your evening with your lovely child. And thank you ever so much to everybody for tonight. Take care, everybody.